everybody. Welcome back to the show. We are here for a special short discussion of the Disney / Star Wars / Disney series, The Mandalorian. Probably many of you have seen it. Doubtless all of you have heard of it. I'm here with James Majewski.
That's me.
And of course, I'm Thomas Miras. And we're not going to be doing a long discussion like we usually do with our Vatican Film List picks, but we're going to talk about a couple things we find interesting about the series, a couple of criticisms, some of the things we liked about it, particularly its use of technology and its use or failure to use, in some cases, the suspension of disbelief that storytelling requires.
I mean, first things first, we should just say that this is the best part of the Star Wars reboot that we find ourselves in the midst of.
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah. We both think this is better than the films. I don't know how much better it is than The Force Awakens.
Which I liked the most of the post.
Taken on its own, regardless of its promise having failed, and its line having died out in the subsequent films, and have really neither James or I were particularly taken with Rogue One, although I'm sure we know a lot of people who were. Didn't see Solo, didn't see Episode 9.
I did see Solo.
Oh, you did see Solo.
Yeah, I watched Solo after watching the first season of Mandalorian.
I see.
Because I was so sad to say goodbye to these characters. I just wanted to be in the Star Wars world again.
Yeah.
And I tried rewatching Rogue One, and I just couldn't.
Interesting.
It was just as bad as I had remembered it.
So James and I both grew up big fans of Star Wars. I watched the movies a lot as a kid. I guess I didn't watch the prequels that much, but I watched them a few times. And I read the books. I don't think you went that far, but
I
as a
played
kid,
the video games.
Yeah, I played the video games, read the books as a kid, up till age 12, 13. But I am somewhat detached. I mean, I like Star Wars. It still gets me excited when it's good, but I am somewhat detached from the intellectual property in a way that some fans probably still are not. There's this whole fandom culture around a number of things, probably most notably in mainstream pop culture, Star Wars and Marvel superhero movies in general. That's fine, but there is something of a danger in being predisposed to like something more simply because it has a certain character in it or a certain spaceship or something, rather than sort of the quality.
Right.
I think it lends itself to exploitation of kind of like the more superficial realities of a fantasy universe.
And it's kind of ironic, I think, because this was something that the prequel trilogies were accused of as being, as falling far beneath the standard of excellence that had been set by the original Star Wars trilogy, and sort of pandering to fan service or throwbacks or whatever, a certain nostalgia. In retrospect, I think that they are far, far less guilty of any of that than our current batch of
other than perhaps the lightsaber fights being somewhat over the top.
But even those like have their own sort of character. There's like a stylistic quality to the prequel lightsaber fights that is unique, where I think in the reboot a lot of the lightsaber fights have felt kind of flat, or like what I would more, it's like, what you would expect to see in an action film. Do you know what I'm saying? The prequel trilogies, the fights they're choreographed in a way that you just don't see in any other films, So like it or hate it, they have their own, there's their own aesthetic, I
see. Okay.
Which I think is what I'm saying about the prequel trilogies more broadly speaking, is that
they're certainly distinctive creations.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. I can get on board with that. Yeah. There's this whole sort of fan service thing, and then kind of the attempt to do something different with it, which I was excited about with Rian Johnson's. We're not fans of that film,
Oh my gosh.
number 8, for various reasons. But, both of us were excited. We were fans of his previous work.
Yeah.
Giving it to basically an indie director, we thought was an interesting choice. But anyway, that's all,
He buckled.
water under the bridge. He buckled. So going back to the whole idea of fandom, like I just to complete that thought, after number 8, I was like, okay, I don't really care if I see another Star Wars movie again. I'm not at the point anymore where I will go see it simply just in case, or because it's Star Wars, which I had been before. Probably Peter Jackson's Hobbit movies helped me to get to that point with sort of franchises in general. Because I did see all of those for that reason.
You saw all of the Hobbit movies?
Yeah, I saw all of them in theater.
Oh, no. See, I stopped after the first one.
Yeah, so we've got these Star Wars movies that are ongoing, and I kind of was detached, but I watched The Mandalorian, and I really enjoyed it. So I think it has a number of qualities that the recent films lack. I think there's like a little bit more sincerity to it in a sense. Insofar as, like, for example, the recent films, Star Wars has always had a little bit of quirky humor to it. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, the recent films, Force Awakens included, have had a kind of a sense of humor that is more of the kind of recent Marvel movies brand of self-referential,
right? Kind
of like when I forget where somebody's like, use the Force, and Han Solo is like, that's not how the Force works.
Yeah, there's like there's an awareness, kind of like an ironic awareness of the intellectual property that you're dealing with.
Yeah, and I think that even though The Mandalorian is certainly lighthearted and quirky, I don't think it does quite that for the most part, as far as I can recall. It doesn't. So I think it has a little bit more sincerity in its dealing with what it is.
And I think that thematically, it's a lot closer to the original Star Wars trilogy and sort of ethos, the world of Star Wars. Even though we're not dealing, at least in season 1, we're not really dealing with Jedi and with the Force a whole lot. There's still a moral, a morality that undergirds the storyline. That I think the Force typifies. That it's a the outward expression of that, but that it's motivating also the storyline and the characters, and specifically in The Mandalorian, this figure of the Mandalorian as a kind of father figure to this baby Yoda, right?
Something that develops more and more as the series goes on, and I think with particular strength in season 2. Another thing I really like about the series is the music. The music has this very... first of all, it's rare to hear in television scores or film scores anything memorable in recent years. There's rarely like a catchy tune that is stuck in your head afterwards.
Right.
But maybe the British Sherlock series had
I think
some
I remember
catchy
reading
melodies.
something. Maybe you shared this with me about. Composers talking about their work on previous Marvel films and explicitly being given the direction to.
Oh yeah, well I forget the technical term for it, but basically they're given like demo. They make these like they're given like demo tracks to model their scores. So like in the film is almost like pre-scored using already made pieces. Some of them scores from earlier movies, some of them scores from earlier Marvel movies or whatever, and the composer is directed to do something similar. So he's essentially like, in some cases, I mean, remixing might be too strong a word, but it's almost like that. He's not working with the previous recording, but he's doing something in the same tempo and same mood.
Being given the direction too to make something not memorable, that's going to just sort of exist in the background and not grab people or be remembered.
So Star Wars, I wouldn't say that the new Star Wars films necessarily have this particular problem. But still, given that the Mandalorian, kind of is set apart musically from the Star Wars franchise as a whole, I wouldn't have expected the music to be particularly memorable because you just don't find that much these days. Melody in all forms of music, melody is in short supply. So we've got this score that's very memorable, and it is very much a throwback, we think, to TV serial dramas of like the 50s and 60s. The kinds of things that inspired George Lucas in the first place when he was making Star Wars. Right. There's very much a Western vibe, and Star Wars has always had Western-like qualities, and The Mandalorian does probably above all have that aesthetically. And so, you've got this kind of, it doesn't sound like a film score, it sounds like a TV score, which is a very particular type of thing. There's a certain cartoon color to it. Sure. I don't know how else to describe it. Yeah. Something I enjoy very much. And as the series has gone on, he's played with those themes and that instrumentation in interesting ways. The composer, whose name I can't recall at the moment. So we just watched season 2, and we wanted to talk about a few of the aspects of that in particular. Before we get to that, though, there's one other element I'd like to talk about. We're not really going to talk about Baby Yoda that much, or maybe we will. I think it's already been talked about plenty. We like him perfectly fine, Yeah. But there's another major use of technology in The Mandalorian, which is this thing they called the volume. I don't know if that's the official name or just kind of a nickname they've given it. So basically, the volume is a cutting-edge kind of replacement for green screen technology that Jon Favreau developed over a number of film projects, including The Jungle Book and other things. I think he did a Lion King, the live-action Lion King remake or something. I would highly recommend, if you have Disney Plus, to watch the Star Wars gallery, Mandalorian gallery behind the scenes episodes, and particularly the episode on technology, because it's really fascinating and they show this thing in action. But basically what it is almost a throwback to the early days of filmmaking when you would have rear projection of landscapes and scenes. You can see this, even going into, like at least the 40s, probably the 50s, when they're shooting car scenes in particular, a landscape will be projected, a moving landscape will be projected behind the car to make it look like they're driving past things. So you'll see it through the windows. And so this kind of is a throwback to that. So what it is, the volume is essentially a series of, it's like wall-to-wall and ceiling screens, TV screens, essentially, with photographed landscapes or in some cases, I think, like rendered sets on it. So it's something that you can film with a camera in the midst of, and it's not put in afterwards. So the actors get to act in that environment, and it's very immersive. Also, you can move things around. So if a mountain needs to be in a different place, to get a better shot, they can change things in real time. And so everything is in real time, and also all the light, which is a big deal, is in real time. So they give the example, in this behind the scenes documentary of how in green screen stuff, they usually try to avoid reflective surfaces because it's a real pain to simulate light on reflective surfaces. So in this case, we have the Mandalorian as the main character, a guy who's wearing shiny armor at all times. So in a green screen situation, they would first have to take the light in post-production, the green reflection out of his armor, and then put in whatever other kind of light. Right. And people who know about animation, and in particular computer generation animation, know that one of the biggest difficulties is making light look convincing.
Mhm.
It's still something it's an ongoing effort.
Yeah.
So that's a huge development, and it's something that they've made a special effort to hire these young directors to direct these episodes so that they'll then be able to use this technology in other contexts. So that in itself kind of like makes The Mandalorian, I think, worth existing because of the way that it's been able to move film technology forward.
And it's nice too, I think, that there's a return to, well, this series represents a return to form in a lot of different ways, but this one in particular, a return to sort of like the studio manner of shooting television or a film, you know? So you watch these old films and they're not shot on location, still less are they shot in a sort of like green screen or motion capture studio. They're shot in a studio with a constructed set, and so there's a kind of feel that you get from that, from not shooting on location but shooting in an entirely constructed environment. And I think that this is a cool 21st century way of achieving that.
Right.
So it's really exciting, certainly.
It's also just funny how digital technology, technology always ultimately has to come full circle to like be able to serve like what was there before technology, you know, one hopes.
That's a good point.
So that's certainly true with like, matters of green technology, for example,
right.
You're ultimately you're starting with industrialization, right? And you're trying to move technology forward, and it's damaging the environment in ways that you don't know. And then ultimately it comes full circle, hopefully, to a place where you can do it in a way that's more in tune with the environment. But, so this is something like that.
Speaking of technology, not all of it is, are we totally enamored with?
Yeah. So there's this trend that's been developing since Rogue One in Star Wars. Star Wars, since the prequels at least, has always had a over-reliance on computer generation problem. And that's one of the big things that the volume in The Mandalorian solves,
right, in
terms of the environments, but also the recent Star Wars movies, one thing they've all done right is to use more prosthetics and things like that, so that it's just better that way. So since Rogue One, they used computer generation, as most people probably know, to recreate one living actor in a younger state, Princess Leia, Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia, and then also to recreate a dead actor, Peter Cushing, as Grand Moff Tarkin. And back in 2017, there was a good essay, I forget the publication, written if you Google The Undeath of Cinema by a Catholic writer named Alexi Sargent. That's Sargent spelled without an A in the last syllable. That's a good commentary on the specific use of CGI in Rogue One. But this is done again in The Mandalorian. Should we say who, or should we just say a famous Star Wars character? A living actor in this case. So the ethical issues are not quite the same.
Right.
But is recreated in the climactic scene of season 2 of The Mandalorian. And a younger aged version of this actor, with the actor today doing voiceover. So it looks kind of weird.
Yeah.
I like the scene. I like that they brought that character back. The dubbing or the mouth animation is not felt like subpar even for today's standards, you know. But it raises this question of this kind of what I call a misguided literalism, where the character has to look exactly the same. So you actually sacrifice reality in the name of a misguided literalism by CG animating this character instead of just hiring an actor who looks like them.
Yeah, because it isn't realism that people are going after. Like some people might say, oh, it's more realistic to have the likeness of this older actor.
Right.
Certainly in the case of Grand Moff Tarkin in Rogue One, some people might say that that's the most realistic way of rendering Grand Moff Tarkin today because the actor who played him is dead.
Right.
But it's not, obviously, because it's unreal. It's computer generated, and no matter how skillfully executed it is, I'm convinced it's always going to be weird and uncanny because every time I've seen it, it's been weird and uncanny. Right. So I don't know that I'm prepared to break down exactly what it was that bothered me about the way this was implemented in The Mandalorian, or in any of the other instances in which it's used in the Star Wars movies for that matter. But what I do know is that none of them look real. All of them require a suspension of disbelief. All of them are unsettling and weird. Yeah. And so if you're going for realism, this certainly isn't the way to go about it.
But when you say the suspension of disbelief, it's a particular kind of suspension of disbelief. It's not the kind of suspension of disbelief required to simply enter into a fantasy world.
Right.
Right? Because the premise is not that this is a place where, humans are recreated as robots or as CG or as holograms or something.
Right. It requires me to... actually suspend the mechanism by which I've even gotten into this story in the first place, right?
Right.
It's a live action film that takes place in space with puppets, and so there is a certain degree of realism present in this fantasy sci-fi world, and that's what hooks me in. That's what makes it believable. That's what makes me able to relate. And now I have to just pretend like I don't notice that this character isn't really there, you know?
Yeah, so it's unfortunate this precedent has been set. And, to what degree fans would get upset if it was another actor who just kind of looked like young Mark Hamill. Yeah. And they could even dub in Mark Hamill's voice. I wouldn't have a problem with that.
Right.
But... I think that maybe it takes a little bit of courage to do something like that. In the case of this is not a Star Wars reboot. So reboots, we know with superhero movies, for example, that they will change the actor.
Yeah.
But of course, their original property is a comic book, typically, which didn't have an original actor in the first place.
Right. Sure.
So it's an unfortunate lack of faith, I think, in the audience.
But also, I think, an unfortunate lack of faith in actors. Okay? So, of course, an actor isn't going to be able to step in and look exactly like Peter Cushing or Carrie Fisher. But an actor very well may be able to recreate something even truer. Right? Which is weird to say, but if you have faith in acting as a craft, there may actually be an extent to which a really excellent actor who's made for this role is able to key into something real about, let's take Carrie Fisher's portrayal of Leia Organa, for instance. Leia shows up at the end of Rogue One, a young Leia, and there may be a way of not only reaching for something, true about this character, but then also bringing something new, which can be an enhancement. I'm thinking about, I'm trying to think of an example, but for instance, the way we've become accustomed to different iterations of say, James Bond, or I haven't seen this television series, but Doctor
Who.
Yeah. There's lots of discussion around these different iterations and what's sort of consistent across these portrayals, but what's also highlighted or brought to the fore and differently. So I think that this is a missed opportunity for it's a lack of faith in your audience and a lack of faith in the actors that you could get, a new generation of actors Which is odd because the franchise hasn't been totally consistent in this, because they did recast a young Han Solo, right? They didn't just use like an aged down Harrison Ford. They took a young contemporary actor.
Yeah. But we had never seen Han Solo that young, and I think that's probably the reason.
Right.
Also, they probably weren't going to do a whole movie with a CGI Han Solo.
Right. But I mean, however you feel about that film, like, it's true that actor, I didn't look up his name before.
Ansel Elgort, I want to say.
Maybe.
Does that not sound like a real name to you?
It sounds like a Star Wars name to me, honestly.
I'm pretty sure that's the name of the actor, but I could be wrong.
Well, he did a fine job, and there's room for him to make the role his own, right? We hear people talk about that, like he or she really made the role their own.
One practical reason I can see why it would be difficult to do this with this particular use of this legendary Star Wars character is that spoilers, by the way, in retrospect, but even for saying that,
you already said Mark Hamill at one point.
Okay, well, forget it. I'm just going to put spoilers on the screen earlier, so people. Yeah. Okay. So the thing is that with the case of James Bond, people can get used to the idea in advance of the fact that there's going to be a new James Bond.
Sure.
This character arrives, whose name is Luke Skywalker, arrives as a surprise for a very short scene.
Yeah.
And none of the other characters know who he is, presumably.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't get a chance for the audience to be told. I can see how some people might be a little confused unless the actor really looked a lot like young Mark Hamill.
Yeah, but there are certain tells, with the...
Well, when R2D... You know what? When R2D2 comes out, that should be good enough, right?
Yeah.
So, R2D2's in this. So, don't tap the mic. So there's that. But then there's this other contrasting suspension of disbelief that we are required to do, that
just to buy into this world at all.
Yeah. Well, right, but I'm now talking about the use of female action characters. Okay.
That's me too.
The female action characters. So we've got, through this whole series, we have this character of Cara Dune, played by...
Oh, I have it written down. Gina Carano.
Gina Carano. She is an MMA fighter in real life. That stands for mixed martial arts.
Right.
And therefore, she is big. She is muscly. She might not be able to beat the strongest man, but she could certainly beat many men.
Probably, and maybe even most men, for all I know.
Yeah.
She looks freaking tough.
So it makes sense that she is able to throw people around. She's able to be an awesome, action hero.
In fact, that's like what her career has been up until this point. I think has been in action movies because she knows martial arts and she is obviously always training and working out.
Correct.
So
in comparison, this is probably less physical action for her because she's shooting laser guns at people more of the time. But so that's fine, right? But then we have all these other characters, especially introduced in season 2, these two female Mandalorians, who are tiny, slender women, and yet they are able to throw down, with the best of them.
Right.
And particularly egregious is because Boba Fett also comes back in this, just so you know. Boba Fett, it's awesome. Boba Fett is amazing in this. He comes back, and there is a particularly egregious scene where she, one of these chicks, where one of these women,
Cosca Reeves,
the actress,
is the character.
Oh, the characters.
The actress is Mercedes Varnado,
and she's a wrestler, actually. That actress, but in
she's not an MMA fighter.
She's not a real wrestler.
She's a like WWE
professional
wrestler.
It's different. She's a tiny woman.
I think her cousin is Snoop Dogg.
Oh, that's cool.
I saw that on Wikipedia.
She's a tiny woman. She throws him around. These characters are also very annoying, just as characters. But the climactic action sequence of the season 2 is the Mandalorian and 4 women, and that's on purpose. That's absolutely on purpose. Storming this Imperial ship.
Right.
So I don't know how much we need to really dig into the obvious ideological aspect of this. But the point is that it's bad as art because we're not expected to be able to suspend our disbelief to see another actor as Luke Skywalker, which doesn't break any of the rules set up in Star Wars. But, the premise of Star Wars, unless you're a Jedi, I suppose, the premise of Star Wars is not that this is a universe where women are equally as physically strong as men. Right. So that's not part of this, the proper suspension of disbelief for this story. Yeah. So it takes you out of it not only because it's not believable in itself, but also because, of course, whether you're in favor of it or not, ideologically, that this is done for ideological reasons.
Right. Yeah, and it's unfortunate because it diminishes the impact that can be had when it's successfully executed. I think that in the case of Cara Dune, this is a perfectly acceptable instance of integrating a female warrior character, but it's totally diminished and watered down when every other warrior you encounter, and not even every other, it's like 75% of like the other warriors that you're encountering are also women out there.
That's actually true because most of the human characters that are fought in this series are women. Yeah, actually, and maybe not most of them, but quite a lot of them.
And part of what makes Cara Dune's the Cara Dune character believable is that she has had to sacrifice something of her femininity in exchange for this prowess on the battlefield. She's not this petite, like a Barbie doll girl. She's tough, and so there has to be a sort of exchange to be able to tumble with the guys, Yeah. And so that is diminished too.
That's very true.
I mean, even her real world commitment, Gina Carano, even her real world commitment to working out and martial arts and building a career on this is kind of diminished by these like pretty girls who show up on set and get to like do a few flips and
not that she's not pretty, but like
and I'm not trying to like and
I mean that sincerely, but these svelte,
she's an attractive woman in her own right, I should say.
These svelte, just these small women, so it's kind of an interesting contrast with the treatment of Luke, like just this misplaced suspension of disbelief.
Right.
Going back to though this kind of like the CG character, it's interesting that this discussion is taking place in the context of a series in which the two main characters, one is a puppet and the other one you almost never see his face because he's wearing a helmet the whole time. So it's interesting insofar as like I guess you don't need to see people's faces necessarily to have a good drama.
Right. Well, then it becomes a choice, right? To reveal the face. A choice that's made to great effect in both season 1 and season 2 with the character of the Mandalorian.
Yes.
But to very like ill effect in the case of Luke Skywalker at the end of season 2. You know, there's no reason why we can't have that whole cool sequence of him coming in with his green lightsaber and his robotic hand and his iconic hood. And I mean, heck, if you want to lower the hood, fine. But like then we just get a nice little shot of like the little bowl cut, the Luke Skywalker 70s bowl cut.
Totally. We
didn't need to see his face.
That's that's a really interesting point too. So the Mandalorian, I like the progression of these climactic moments in which the Mandalorian, Din Djarin chooses to remove his helmet. So as people know, it's part of his code as a Mandalorian not to. He does it at the end of season 1. Well, no, we see him do it once. He takes it off, but we don't see his face.
Right.
He's by himself. He's taking it off to eat.
And none of us are like, what? We didn't get to see his face?
Right.
What?
Yeah. And
we accept that this is like a something that we have to buy into with the
yes. So that kind of establishes that.
Yeah.
Then at the end of season 1, he takes it off but he's alone with a droid. So that is kind of an act of vulnerability in a sense, but it's less because he takes his helmet off and more that he's trusting a droid because he has the thing about droids. The droid needs to give him medical attention, takes off his helmet, and he allows it because there's no humans. So then, like 2/3 of the way through season 2, we get this great episode where Bill Burr's character returns. They're infiltrating an Imperial base. He has to remove his helmet to log into this Imperial computer system. It's the only way that he can do it. And he does it in a room full of Imperials and with this Bill Burr character, who is not the guy you would expect that he would remove his helmet in front of.
Right.
And it's a really great...
That's a great episode.
A great episode and a great scene.
Not enough women, though.
That's right. And...
no, it should be observed that none of those Imperial guys in there are women in the base, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
Like when it's the bad guys can all be men.
That's not true, actually. There's a bunch of women on the... Well, maybe in that case, but there's a bunch of women in Imperial ships.
Fair.
In both the Mandalorian...
They're kind of like androgynous.
In both the Mandalorian and the recent
that's a good
trilogy.
Point. But I, just as a quick aside, when they're on that like little squid planet, and we're first introduced to these female Mandalorians, like all the like bad squid dudes are dudes.
Yeah.
We don't see any bad squid women coming and like menacing the Mandalorian.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. So where was I?
I'm sorry. We were talking about that episode with Bill Burr.
Yeah. So he takes off his helmet in that episode, but he does it out of practical necessity. In the final scene of the final season so far, he takes off his helmet purely out of love. And it's a very powerful moment, and I'm sure not intentionally, but maybe in the subconsciously at least, in this moment where everybody's wearing masks.
Yeah.
Often unnecessarily, not always, but often, people are not seeing each other's full faces. And so it's this very powerful moment for me to see him take off his mask, and particularly for that reason, to show a child his face and to give him permission as a father figure to go away and train with Luke Skywalker. And it was very, very powerful.
Yeah.
So I found that towards the end of this, there were moving moments in the first season, but I found that they were much more towards the end of the second season. There were many more moments that engaged me emotionally, and particularly this climax. And I will say, even though I didn't like the CG on Luke Skywalker, I did like the use of his character.
Sure.
I still found the scene powerful.
I think it was awesome. Everything before revealing his face was super cool.
Yeah.
And I like, my breath was taken away.
Yeah.
And that's why it's all the more unfortunate when they make a choice like that empties it of its well, it's supposed to be this emotional climax, and now it's emptied of its content, really, because I'm taken out. And I think that The Mandalorian is just hitting so many notes totally right on, which makes the sour notes all the more like... So for instance, you're talking about this moment where he gives his permission as a father to Grogu to go off and train. It's like that alone. I mean, when was the last time you saw something like that out of Hollywood or in popular culture? This,
usually people are leaving their parents against their will, or their parents get killed conveniently after their parents say you can't go off. In the case of Luke.
But here there's a nod toward the seriousness of the need for a father's blessing. And but the fact that that's situated within this episode wthere's like, assaulted this Imperial frigate with like 4 women, there's like a dissonance there where we have this reckoning with his masculinity, his fatherness, you know, at the same time being sort of diluted in this sea of like female ninjas.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I know
Yeah.
exactly what you mean.
So anyway, you know, some things to think about.
Yeah. But we're looking forward to the next season. And
I mean, I'm looking forward to him just like punching Bo-Katan in the face.
yeah. Well, yeah, that's I don't know where it's going to go from there.
Like, you know, it'd be nice if we could just get her out of the way in the first episode or so.
Well, that's what I don't want to see. And I'm fine with Asuka. She's a cool character. She's
cool.
also a Jedi. She
Right.
has supernatural powers.
I totally believe it.
So it's not about, well, you can't have women stories. No, that's nonsense. That's
Right.
not what it's about at all. So thank you for watching and listening. And I hope you didn't watch it with the volume off because you missed a lot. If so, we would like you, if you have watched this video on YouTube, to do a little something for us, which is to click the subscribe button.
Is it over here?
I don't know.
Is it down there?
I don't know where it's going to be. So you got to click the subscribe button and you got to put your notification on the little bell. And please also do what I just said again, but don't do it twice. But just do it if you forgot to do it the first time. If you do it again, it'll unsubscribe. So that's actually a mistake. You can't do it twice. But if you want to subscribe here and also to the podcast, that's fine. Okay.